I got a question on the channel little while ago asking about random generators for wilderness encounters, and I gave the quick answer to a couple things I recommended, and I realized when I did that first of all, I don't think I mentioned my own book, but second of all, that I don't think there's an easy place to find kind of a list of some rich random generators for wilderness encounters, at least that exist in physical form. So I put together this video. This is not like a top, I think there's going to be 6 things I'll talk about here. It's not like a top 6. It's just 6 things that I turn to that will generate random wilderness for any type of RPG kind of situation you're in. I'm going to talk about them from the perspective of the order of the video is going to talk about them from the perspective of those that are basically collections of things where you simply roll a dice or die and get an output, and that is what it generates, to a couple at the end where there are some light rules attached that you may or may not want to use in conjunction with the generator, and it would still have generation possibilities that is just from a die roll. So that's how we're going to organize the video, and we are going to start out. This is not going to be what we're going to talk about first. I just had that there for some visual appeal. I will say also that for most of these, they have appeared in my streams, in some of my streams, some of them on their own, and some of them just in use and in sessions and such. So there may be, if you watch every single video that I do and you remember every single video that I do, you're going to see some things here that you have seen before. If I can, I'll try to put a link to, if I've done a specific individual video on something, I will try to put a link up there so you could investigate that further. I'm not going to have time to go through every single aspect of every single product in detail, but hopefully enough to give you a sense of what the product offers and how you might want to use it if you pick it up. So we will start here with my own book, Wanderings. This is I describe it here as a Gothic roll and read table. It is a hex crawl, external, environmental D88 narrative table drawn from Gothic literature that can be used in a number of different ways. And I have a suggestion here at the outset. There is a table, a D8 table to interpreting the entry. So if you aren't sure, for example, how you want to use something, you could roll the D8 to start. And when you turn to this, you could say that the entry relates to a past triumph for your PC or party. Find a way to connect the entry to something that happened as a success for your PC or party. And then you would roll your D88s to determine what entry you were looking at here. So we could go to entry 16 and read what entry 16 is. And it is a description you'll find here, I'm not going to do the whole reading, but you'll find in here descriptions of environmental situations, reference to other PCs or events or people that have happened. So you could, for example, learn, in this case, it happens to be very much terrain-oriented, shadows and grasses and a feeling of where you are in space. So some of them have more to do with perceptions of things in the environment and such. It can be used for fantasy as well as Gothic. It has graveyards and moors and wailing women and country lanes and things like that. So dark fantasy or any type of horror, Gothic, Lovecraftian, supernatural, occult, those kinds of things. And some of the entries are long enough that you could, like pretty long, that you could go to one entry and use it in different spots in your game, like one paragraph, another paragraph, another. So I would say this is the simple to use in the sense that you could simply just roll the D8s and get your entry, or you could go to that beginning table, as I mentioned, and see how you wanted to interpret, or a suggestion of how you wanted to interpret that entry that you got before or after. It could also be used to establish just an entire setting for a story, because there are entries that talk about other people and things. So you could set out here, this is an entry that is describing a person entering into an environment, and you're given lots of suggestions of what they are carrying, why they are there, and that could be the beginning of an entire session. So that is a book of random entries that have to do with the environment and outside space and the things that are going on in characters' minds as they are outside of a space. The second one I want to talk about that is also just a kind of what I would call a roll and read is this GMs Miscellany from Raging Swan Press, Wilderness Dressing. This is a system-neutral resource. I should say at the outset that all of these, well, it's not the outset anymore, but all of the things I'm showing here can be used with basically any type of rule set. You might have to do some modifications. There's one that's keyed mostly to 5e, but you should be able, they're flexible enough that they could be used with any rule set. So on the Wilderness Dressing one, you get in here an excessive amount of material. Even though it looks like a thin book, you get a section on features and events. So you have places with events, so campsites, small castles, castle dressing, small ruins, ruin dressing, extreme weather, rainstorms, snowstorms, windstorms. You also get tables for people that will be occupying the external space. Then you have land areas like borderlands, desert, farmlands, forests, hills, mountains, plains, and you get a combination of dressing, so what it looks like, as well as events. And there are some what are called minor events. I don't know if there's anything major events, but they're all minor events. And you also get sea, by land and by sea. You get coastal and voyages and shipwrecks and such. So you could, for example, let's go to the coastal dressing here, which is here, and we'll just roll up. So you could decide that you're going to be making a map here. I don't think there's an overall table to randomize how your map is going to go, but you could figure that out yourself and create one. But let's look at, so for example, I think they're all D100 tables. If we rolled on the coastal dressing table here to start, say we were going to start making a map coming in by land, and we said, it says coconuts are arranged to spell help in the sand, and an arrow made of sticks points westward. So that's actually pretty convenient as a dressing. I was hoping we'd get something that almost feels like an event to me. But so then we have an event 36. The event is a faint keening rises over the sound of the waves, reaching a crescendo as the waves break against the shore. So somebody needs some help. And let's say we wanted to travel and we saw that this was a coast that was, say, up against some hills, perhaps. So that we look toward the hills, toward the west, and what do we see? A near perfect rock dome, its cracks colored deep black like a web-shaped scab tops the hill. So if it's near perfect, maybe somebody created that. Maybe that is a place we need to go. That's a marker of some human activity here. And we travel there and we see the exposed roots of a massive hickory tree grow out of a craggy hill, creating a protected overhang. Interesting that that's described as an event, not dressing, because it almost seems to me that would be more of a dressing. In any case, this protected overhang, perhaps we decide that we investigate this. This is where somebody lives, and that becomes the beginning of our adventure. And if we wanted to stick with this book, we could say we go in there and we find there's a place that a traveler is set up. So it could be a traveler that's a bard, a minstrel, or a troubadour, or a peddler, or a merchant. maybe it's a bandit. So let's say it's the bandit rank and file. Let's say the bandits are camping out here and they have called for help because, I don't know, who knows why. So, well, this is a D10 roll. So they could be humans or half elks or half orcs. Let's just say they're humans. So here is a description of Akana Kum, a young, impulsive woman who dreams of becoming an adventurer. When she meets the PCs, she makes a snap decision to join them. She tries to act as a mediator between her fellow bandits and the party to avoid bloodshed. So they're going to pick up a traveling companion, and perhaps she has information about who put that SOS out or whatever. Or we could pick up a hook from this bandit, and it says, when the PCs arrive, the sound of a brawl echoes through the trees. Two bandits are settling a disagreement with a fistfight, and their distracted companions are enjoying the entertainment, making them less than alert. The PCs can likely surprise the would-be attackers or sneak past. So again, you could use this to guide an entire story, or you could use it to just create a map if you focused on the dressing part of things, just to create a map to travel over. So let's say we went up from the water into the hills, and then we came upon some farmland. So we want to see what the farmland looks like. And we roll on this table to do that. And we see that as we come over the crest of the hill, we see a pond providing water for this farm is home to several turtles that lays on the rocks, jutting from the pond's surface. So that is a feeling of kind of calm and pastoral. And we could continue walking along. Maybe we then see some small ruins out in the distance, and we want to see, what are those small ruins? Well, as we turn away from the turtles, we see that what catches our eye is a rotting castle barn standing half submerged in the muck. Water from a recent rainstorm lies a couple of inches deep in the interior, where small slimes and oozes slither about brightly colored mushrooms. Perhaps we would want to investigate that. So that gives, I think, somewhat of a flavor for what the wilderness dressing offers. It is a thin but rich book. You packed into basically 120-ish pages is just a ton of information, as well as a lot of variety. So because there's the combination of the events and the dressing, as well as explicit kind of tables with hooks and complications and opportunities, you could really build out a huge story this way. And if you put into the story a couple of characters, you could have some interactions very easily and travel through just using this. And in fact, it offers a little bit, it's like Wilderness Plus, because you have the castles out in the wilderness. So that is the GMs Miscellany. I turn to this a lot. As I said, I could see quite easily doing an entire, this being the basis, this one book being the basis for tons of different types of sessions if you had a group of characters with some type of light rule set. And the next thing I'm going to turn to is the Tome of Adventure Design. This is featured in my most popular video, Easy Ways to Be Your Own GM, which is right up here. I know this is possibly not the most updated version of this book. They're doing, or did, a second edition that I don't have. I should probably look into that. But I want to talk about this here because while most of this book is not about wilderness, what it does have with wilderness is quite useful when you pair it with some of the principles and starting points that they have. So what we're going to do first is look here at some of these tables in the front of the book. And I'm not going to go through what this book has because my other video really does do that. This book has much more than just random tables. As you can see here, it has a lot of commentary on how to create adventures and put things together. But what's interesting here is this location overview approach, these tables, because you can roll on these, and they're D100 tables with lots of different options to give yourself something that will be like an adventure starter. So, for example, if we rolled up this just to look, so we've got the quaking island of the quaking island of the man-eating mother. So the quaking island of the man-eating mother, I mean, that right away kind of would inspire you perhaps to create or turn to like a weird type of rule set if that was going to be your location setting, as opposed to other options you could get here that would be much different in tone. And it also has location overview in terms of names of things. So let's do this a little faster. So we've got here, that would be the shunned sanctuary of the moth genie. So again, kind of a strange locale, but you could really take that and pair, if you put the shunned sanctuary of the moth genie with the quaking island of the whatever I said before, it gives you a flavor of a place already without even the location itself, and then you could go and start to roll up the physical aspects of the location itself. But you have the wilderness tables here, and they will give you options for things like the nature of unusual trees, who owns an island, there are a plant part with an odd attribute, or an unusual feature of an animal, or weird terrain features. So you'll be getting things that become evocative. No, that's not going to work. There we go. You will be getting things that are going to be potentially narrative laden for you, like the sand, earth, or the mud is surrounded by strange insects or small creatures that are not insects and might even be otherworldly. So you could use that as a prompt if you're using your environment or your random wilderness generation as the potential for a story prompt. You could do it that way. There are also things out in the world that you get a lot of random tables for, like caravans and cargo. So this will be injecting some kind of active life into your world, something else that's literally passing by that you could interact with or not. Some of it's magical. You could be just small cargo, or you could combine the two things. So it could be pelts or fur that have minerals with unusual propensities. We have desert wilderness tables here. Same kind of deal, the type of desert with a description of it. You have some desert legends tables, so you could use those again to the lizard storm is some part of some legend that has to do with your desert. There's oasis, unusual sand types, and we get forest wilderness tables as well. Hills and mountains, sort of what you would expect. Unusual cliffside. So let's see, what's an unusual cliffside here? Carved with ladders or steps. And you have some fossils that you could, perhaps you're climbing up there and you're finding a human-sized reptile, and the feature of it is that it has armor plating on it. So perhaps there's actual lizard people that live here. And there are some swamp wilderness tables too. So while there aren't, in the context of this entire book, most of it is not devoted to wilderness. There are very easy to use wilderness tables here that I think, if you own the book or are considering getting the book, is worthwhile for adding to your random wilderness library. Now we're going to turn to some supplements that have some rules attached there. optional. You can use them or not use them, but I think they add something to the product. And this is the first one we're going to look at on that category is Into the Wyrd and Wild by Charles Ferguson Avery. I definitely did a video on this, and you can see the link to that up here. This offers just a huge amount in terms of creating a setting, there's like 100 different beasts of branch and bone. It's system neutral, but you get stats and descriptions for monsters that could inhabit a setting that you do. I can't remember if there is a table that randomizes them. I feel like there's not. So that's something, if you are playing solo and you're looking to travel through and sort of randomly encounter some of these awesome, like this living idol here, for example, even within it, it has a random living idol generator. So you can give it a name, a title, what it actually does, what it looks like. Let's just quickly look at this. As I said, I do have a separate video on it, but it offers light rules for travel. So things that can happen to you while you're traveling and an impact that would have, like if you become exhausted or lost or sick in some way. There are some rules for what happens if you are going to camp out in the setting that you are creating and looking to use or replenish your supplies, for example. You could take it to another detail where you actually are going hunting and you are finding or not finding things that you're hunting for and having setbacks or not. And again, you can pick and choose among these rules. So you could create a setting and decide that you're going to be doing overnight camping with the risks associated with that, perhaps some encounters, but not actually replenishing supplies. For example, if you find something, you can find things through cleaning the body. You could even go into details of what happens with the moon, for example. The Call of the Wild are going to be sort of, this is a D60, well, this is a D50 table for things that you might hear or feel out in the wild. This is kind of a darkish setting. I mean, you would get that from the Wyrd and the Wild. So, for example, you might be finding some strange symbols and designs dancing in your head, and all of a sudden in the middle of the night feel the need to carve them onto trees. Or you may all of a sudden be able to speak to vermin. They understand you and follow your commands if they are willing to do so. You can offer them food or a favor to increase the chances of them accompanying you. So kind of like things that might get into your head, for example, if you were out in the wild. There are rules for what might happen if you become lost or become mad or crazy being out there in the wild. And then there is the section, as mentioned, on this very lengthy section on these beasts that you might encounter out there. And each of them has a 2-page spread, and some of them have within them, as we already saw, random tables to generate the specifics of what, for example, a feral knight might look like or what his backstory could be. So you could pull that in and run that for yourself in terms of having encounters and having that impact your story. Gripple bats and a hermit spider. What type of treasure might they have? So there are, in this book, a lot of inhabitants of the wilderness that you would be creating. And then moving on in the book, you get to NPC factions that could be, again, optional or not, in the setting that you're creating, with a list of what they do, their history, how they could impact the world that you're in. And they're all quite very different. So you get the backstory of them and then some random tables that will help you interact with them or bring specificity of that faction into your world. And then, so for example, the wild elves, there's a specific treasure table here. And again, you could pick and choose this material as you wished. So you could use that treasure table without having the elves, for example. There's a section on artifacts that may be left in the world that you might encounter and the effects that those could have on you, and there are quite a lot of them. Again, I don't know offhand how many of these there are. They're alphabetically listed, and then some of them have within the listing some differentiation in terms of a random table. I don't know that this whole section itself is randomized, but obviously you could easily do that for yourself. There are some magical items and things here, some spells. Again, same deal, not sure that this is randomized for you, but you could easily do that if you wanted to. So you could have some soothing moss spell. Moss erupts beneath your feet, carpeting the ground in a soft, pleasant moss bed. You temporarily can summon this to sleep and get a full night's rest, for example. So again, you could randomize this to be something you would encounter. You could randomize it to be something you have, or you could just add it to your character as a kind of aspect of your character. And then it has at the end, it has something that's called the Dungeon of Tree and Stone. And essentially what this is a way of turning a wilderness into kind of quote unquote a dungeon with restrictions and rooms and a kind of delineated place to go, almost like the rules here, almost like giving you a way to generate a point crawl. And I go into this in more detail in my own video on this book, where you have a certain area and pretty light rules, but effective ways of creating a whole map in that area that has difficulty level of travel from place to place, that has suggestions of what types of encounters you might have. And if you walk your way through this light rule set, you will generate a specific map of places you can go to as the kind of fabric of your wilderness. Then there's a section on various flora that you might encounter with descriptions and uses about it. And again, not randomized as a table, but you could do that for yourself or just read it for suggestions or placement in the wilderness map that you are creating. And because it has descriptions and uses, it will give you potentially little hooks for your story. Of course, you may encounter things in the woods and in the wilderness that are not super great for you, and so then there are diseases that could impact you. Hazards and traps that you might find. And again, this book does not offer the tables to completely randomize this for your placement in your map, but that's something you could easily do for yourself if you wanted to, and then place randomly bone meal quicksand or a euphoria stream. Then we have a D50 table here for things that you might find if you search a body. You have also a D50 table here for random trails and paths, so an ancient stone staircase descending into a wooded gulch, or a trail made with glittering quartz broken into sand and pebbles. So you could just take all of this, forgetting all of the material at the beginning of the book for a moment, you could take all of this, start here, create an entire map, and based on these points and rules here with trails and difficulty of travel, and then populate it with your beasts from the front here, either randomly or intentionally, as well as building in the specific name of the place. So you have the Mound of the Ancients, or the Trail of Fool's Gold, Evergreens of Regret. Very thematic. In fact, you could even start here with naming this and moving on from there. You have a D50 table explaining what an overall danger is and what the secret or the treasure is. So, for example, the trails change course every full moon, and it has relic bones of an ascended saint. So that could be a spark or a structure for an adventure and travel through this area that you'll be creating. There are wilderness scenes, types of woods, smells and sounds. So again, just things that will layer your wilderness, the world that you're creating with suggestions. So you have a grove of discarded statues that you could be walking through and encountering in the strange topiary woven with bones. And you might hear something is stifling a laughter. Malicious chuckles slip out. What could that be? Constant angry bird calls surround you from all sides. They are mocking you. So you can see the feel for this when you read some of these entries, that it is this kind of weird and wild, dangerous environment with pine sap, acrid and overpowering, its smell clinging to everything. The tables here really do evoke an eerie kind of setting for you. And then you have tables, a D50 table of encounters. And these are specifics to the bestiary that is here. So for example, you could encounter this Bluck sound, twitching with the sound of splintering wood. It has a D6 table for the mood that it is. And if you encountered that, you would go back here and alphabetically be able to find exactly what that is. This is this growling beast that kind of emits splinters and things like that. And it gives you the quantity of it, the HP that it has, the hit dice. Again, it's system neutral, so you would maybe need to adjust it based on the rule set that you were using, but you could use this table to encounter these things randomly, and it will give you, again, with each of it, the mood that it is. So it might be, for example, waiting to strike, actually stalking you, attacking only at night, or following you but indifferent. So based on this, you could either choose or not to use the mood table. So not everything necessarily would have to be you encountered it and you fought it, but it could be, as it says, the mood of it. And that's what a theme for this book is mood, that it is pairing a physical locale with a very eerie, weird kind of mood, and that is what the book offers. And then at the end, you get 100 actual weird locations that have been created for you. So you could, for example, roll on this table and get like the fungal carpet. The area is dark. An unnatural ceiling of vines and moss blocks all light, as well as traps a damp, cool air. Or a lake that is a smooth beach of salt and pepper-colored sand surrounds a great lake. Small, gentle waves lap at the shore, while its depths are the color of dark emeralds. Or a fairy grove, for example. So you could even roll on that and put those things into the point crawl, hex crawl area that you've created, and then give yourself a place to travel through and have encounters. So in and of itself, you could completely run a game this way, and you could create a wilderness this way that's kind of a living, breathing place, and put your players into it, or player into it, to travel through. So Into the Wyrd and Wild is an excellent setting that in and of itself, on its own, offers light rules for travel. You know, again, you could pick them up as you chose, for travel, for starvation, for hunting, for desiccated bodies and what you might find there, for having the beasts that live in this world and having various encounters with them. And then next up, we have Untold Encounters of the Random Kind. This is 1,000+ random encounters for any tabletop RPG, although it is keyed to 5e, but it can be adapted pretty quickly. And it is not just wilderness in here. You have wilderness, dungeon, town, and some example adventures. But the wilderness and the town also, in a way, I would count as outside wilderness, because you have cemetery, docks, things that are not explicitly dungeons. So we're going to take a look. Let's go here first to the thing that is explicitly wilderness encounters. And the reason that I'm including this as something as having light rules is you'll see that there are some very light rules here on how to select encounters in the various regions. And it opens with a discussion of what is in the chapter, that it gives a bigger picture about what wilderness encounters and adventures can mean in the context of a game. And it explains the various regions that are featured here. There's Arctic, desert, forest, mountains, plains, sea and shore, swamp and jungle. And it explains too that you can roll on mixed regions. So it will give you the option to do everything randomly. So in this case, we rolled on the Arctic, and it also gives you some discussion here of how much you might want to have encounters, tracking and foraging, what that might mean. And it does key it to specifically the boxes here talk about 5e. So if you are using this with 5th edition, you get some explicit linkage here. So in this case, for tracking and foraging, it tells you that characters with proficiency in survival can both hunt and forage to sustain themselves without having to make any skill checks, although this would limit travel speed. So it is helpful to you if you are using 5e, but not impossible to use otherwise. In the section here, we have discussion of the regions and what they are, the weather, the visibility, and some GM notes for what the impact of this wilderness or environment might be on your players and on what's going on. And then we have the D100 table here of various encounters. So on a 13, we will be having a blizzard, snow filling the air, eyes and noses. And as this goes, what you do is all the encounters are alphabetically explained or delineated later on. So we would move here to look at more information about a blizzard. We would turn to the back here, and we have a narrative about what that actually means. And we have some light rules here, this in brackets, the near impossible. That's basically the check that you would need to do to have the impact of seeing. In this case, it's near impossible to see and navigate. And if you are going to make shelter, you're going to take some light damage in this blizzard condition. And let's look at, let's do one more example here of something. Here, this encounter is lines in the ground, some complex patterns that you might see in the ground. So let's see how that is described. And you'll see here under lines in the ground, this could appear in an Arctic environment or the desert environment. So not everything is going to appear in every environment, but there are some things that will appear in multiple environments. So these are regular lines of discolored ground at a variety of angles in this area. Characters will find it very difficult to ascertain what pattern these lines are making without some form of aerial view. And if they don't see the pattern, it explains what might happen, that it might summon a group of minor horrors. Those are going to be elite monsters. And it will explain a little bit about what those monsters are and how they should be played. And I think now is a good time to show you maybe what I should have showed at the beginning, which is this is the discussion of the mechanics. And so all of these things, these key words, are going to be referenced in brackets in the random tables later on. So for example, if something, it says that, so for example, if damage is described as major, it explains to you it's a serious amount of damage, not enough to trouble a full health character outright, but they would not want to suffer many of those. So you could use this, or would need to use this, to key it to the rule set that you were using to know, for example, if you encountered a monster that was doing major damage, exactly how many points of damage that would be. Ditto for something like challenges. An easy challenge, standard, elite, boss, or overwhelming. You would need to put that with your own rule set to come up with the skill check number or whatever it was that you were using. It does have specific conversion pages here for guidelines to use these with 5th edition. So again, if you're using 5th edition, you don't even have to worry about that. You can just specifically use this rule, like what a simple and difficulty encounter would mean. And of course, if you're using something based off of 5th edition, this will be helpful to you in further conversion of that. So just to go back and look a little more here at some of the entries in this book, we can see the desert one. Again, each section has an overall discussion of the overall environment and what the sky is like, the heat, the sands, and then what travel might be like throughout it, and visibility and weather. So a really robust picture of what it could be. And again, the considerations in GM notes are useful. Like, for example, if you're doing combat here, combat on sand is very, well, typo there, difficult, and movement especially is limited. Any campfires will be visible for miles around due to the lack of cover. So it gives you some light suggestions. And again, the familiar D100 table with the encounters that you might have in the desert. And we have this for a variety of regions: forest, the mountains, the plains, the sea and shore. It's pretty thorough. And swamp and jungle. And then there are some wilderness boons that it says every region has a chance to add a boon. So you can have the role here. You might find a detailed map or a small stash or some tree gems, for example. So it is, and then there's a list of the encounters. There's over 350 encounters in this section, and a suggestion of what regions they might be in, had in the best area. So the ambush predator might be most likely in a swamp or a jungle, as opposed to an archaeologist who could show up, basically almost anywhere. Whereas arrows might be specifically a wilderness boon, that you might find traces of some arrows somewhere. Super useful. And this book as a whole is really great because it does offer so much in terms of other areas. Like I said, they have the town. We'll look at the town for a second, wilderness, as well as the dungeon. There's a lot of pictures of this book online. I have not done a video just on this book because there's so much online about it, but it's certainly relevant to this particular video with the wilderness encounters. But if you want to see more of what is in it, you could just look it up online, and there's a ton of stuff. But let's look, for example, at the docks as another possibility of something that you could have. Again, familiar here, a description of what a dock district might be like, who might be in this place, and something about law and order here, and utilities and crime, of course, the architecture, some GM notes, as well as encounters. So that is a look inside Untold Encounters. Again, some definitely keying to 5e, some ability to explicitly modify, or some direction, I should say, in the level of encounter difficulty, terrain difficulty, etc., that you can import into your own system. So that's why I consider it to have some kind of light rules attached to it. And then the last thing we're going to look at are not books at all. These are card decks that have appeared on my channel in a couple of videos. We've got the Geomorph, Pocketlands Geomorph cards for the High Seas, as well as the Kingdom. And I also have Marshes. And these are terrain cards that come with a key to what is on the card, as well as some extremely light rules about how you might make use of them. And you could do this in any number of ways, just simply laying them out randomly as such and referring to the keys and having your terrain there. Or there are rules that I'll show you in a moment that allow you to sort of build out and play through a terrain that you create with the cards. And I'm not sure that I've shown those on the channel. I've been sort of meaning to do a playthrough of that, but I just haven't done that. The backs of the cards, for better or worse, they are key to what the card itself is. And I say better or worse because it doesn't give you the ability really to have a stack of cards sitting up and just turn it over and be completely unknowing about what it might be. You could use the cover card, the top card, to cover that and then pull one out. But the way it is now, if you had a stack of cards, you would know, for example, you're going to be seeing some mountains here. Might not be the biggest deal, but it is something to note about that. And let's just take a quick look at the rules that you could use to play these out in a game. So I've got a couple of rules here. The credits are here. These are Alexei Aparin made the cards themselves, as well as the Overland Travel rules here. And what they do is they give you the explanation of how the cards work and some random tables for where you might start your journey, and then how you would go about discovering or traveling between regions and discovering something. And then it explains to you what to do in terms of rolling on various tables to see what you discover. And it will procedurally create a landscape while you travel through. And lots of examples of how the various regions would interact. And then you get some D66 tables to tell you what you actually find. And you could therefore play them with the card, pulling in a card and referring to a table and saying that you discover something on, this was unfortunately a swamp card, so that probably wouldn't have you finding anything there. But for example, if you had a forest here, the Misty Thicket, you could decide that you found a particular feature there, a tower perhaps, or a dungeon, a cave, a keep, etc. So there are also NPCs that you could come across using this rule set. And then separate from that, with the cards themselves, are the rules that go with the cards to explain how you can put them together, how you could use them either in solo role-playing or as a GM, and explains what's in the, I have the kingdom and the high seas and the swamp, as I said. And it is basically a journey game where you are traveling, moving, going to different locations, having encounters, taking actions, and resting. And again, you have some D66 tables to help you with that, and an explanation of how you are choosing the cards, moving to various cards, and understanding what the terrain means. You can use a die roll that is keyed to the space on the card to tell you sort of where you're exiting the card and where you're coming into a card as to what you might be encountering. So while this is the sort of heaviest in terms of a rule set, there's actually a game that you can play with these cards. It is completely optional, and the cards themselves, as I have demonstrated in a couple of videos, and I'll try to remember to put the link up, or maybe someone in the comments can tell me, because I honestly don't remember the names of the videos. I know I've used these in at least 2 videos, but I really don't remember which ones. Whoops. So that is a look at the physical component of creating a random wilderness. And again, you could just simply build out a map using random cards and looking at the provided keys to determine what is what and how you might move through it and have various different types of terrain and random wilderness encounters.